Hey everybody, Dr. Sean Talbot here. Hey, I'm really excited to be presenting this masterclass to you on the topic that you can see on the screen right now, optimizing mental wellness, the brain body biome. So we're going to be talking in this, we're going to be talking about the microbiome, we're going to be talking about gut integrity, we'll be talking about the gut brain axis, we'll be talking about the whole range of mental wellness mood states. So we'll talk about depression and anxiety and mental focus and energy levels and sleep quality and things like that. So hoping to get through this in less than an hour. But it's sort of a deep dive into this concept of mental fitness. This is my 14th book. I've been writing about this concept for a long time. And it's a very important topic. So you can see the objectives here, what we're gonna learn in this next 45 minutes to hour together about the microbiome gut brain axis and how it relates to mental well-being. We're going to talk about how the bacteria in our gut determine what happens in the brain and how they relate to overall well-being. We're going to talk about how those signals get out of balance, and they're out of balance in a lot of people these days, but then how to rebalance them using natural interventions, key of which is nutrition, and then how to choose foods and probiotics and prebiotics and other nutrients to help maximize those benefits. So we're going to get rolling here, and let me see if I can do this. Okay, looks like we're going. So here's a little bit about my background. I'm going to try to move this little video around little by little, and make sure it doesn't cover any of the text. So here's some of my background: PhD in nutritional biochemistry. That's important for you to understand because a lot of what I'll talk about is. I like as a nutritional biochemist for people to understand what is the root cause of something. So if we're talking about, eat a Mediterranean style diet to help improve overall mood, we also want to understand why, right? There is really good evidence for that, which we're going to talk about. But why is that? What is it about that food that is having its psychological effect? It's really being driven by biochemistry. Some of those effects are happening at the level of the gut. Some are happening at the level of the brain. Some are happening in the nervous system and the circulatory system. Some involve neurotransmitters. Some of those benefits involve inflammatory markers, et cetera, et cetera. So the biochemical piece of it is going to be really important as we go through here. You can see all the rest, blah, blah, blah. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can always hit these two websites. These are the two best places to find me. DocTalbot.com is where we run a lot of our educational programs. We have certifications, we have mini courses, things like that. Three Waves Wellness is a place you can find out about the mental wellness retreats that we do, some of the products that we do. I'm not going to talk about any of that kind of stuff in this particular presentation because I really want to focus on the science around all of this. So here before we start talking about mental wellness in general, I want you to understand just a couple of really important points. How you feel is not just in your head. It's also in your gut. In this most recent book, Mental Fitness, I talk about three brains. I talk about the brain in your head, the brain in your gut, what we call your second brain, and the brain in your heart, your third brain. I'm not really going to talk about the heart in this particular presentation. This masterclass is really about the gut-brain axis and the microbiome and sort of the second brain. But just suffice to say that the heart is a collection of about 40,000 neurons and can legitimately be thought of as a heart. And the signals, electrical signals, that come out of the heart have an impact on not only physical performance, but also mental performance. Okay, so I'll just leave that there. We'll be mostly focusing on the gut as the second brain. And the fact that no matter where you are on this, what we call the mental wellness continuum, we can do something about it. We can change how we feel in a lot of different ways. So, we can, and nutrition is one of the most impactful ways for us to do that. Anytime we eat, it's going to change the microbiome. It's going to change what is happening at the level of the bacteria in our gut, and that's going to change the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin. In case I don't say it, I'll say it now. 90% of the body's neurotransmitter, or 90% of the body's serotonin is made in the gut. So that's the happiness neurotransmitter. 70% or so of our body's dopamine, the neurotransmitter of motivation, is made in the gut. About 50% of our GABA, which is the body's primary relaxing neurotransmitter, is made in the gut. We make about 80% of our melatonin in the gut. We make a good portion of our oxytocin for social connections in the gut. The list goes on and on and on. Let me also say this. Those neurotransmitters that are made in the gut, they stay in the gut, but their signal doesn't stay in the gut. So when we say 90% of the serotonin is made in the gut, it's not like you make serotonin in the gut and it leaks out of your gut lining into your bloodstream and it flows up to your brain and it leaks across the blood-brain barrier and makes you happier, right? It doesn't happen that way. But what we know is that having more serotonin in the gut does send a signal. It might be a signal that goes through the vagus nerve up to the brain. It might be a signal that goes through your cytokines, which are these signaling molecules we'll talk about in just a little bit, that can get across the blood-brain barrier. It could be the immune system is a communication organ that can communicate with your microbiome and with your neurons and your glial cells in your brain. So the signal gets across. It just doesn't get across in the way that makes the most logical sense, that this serotonin gets up to the brain and makes us happier. We know it doesn't work that way. But what people should understand is that no matter where you are in this mental wellness continuum, if you can see my cursor now, you're at the low end, you're in the middle, or you're up at the high end, we can meet you where you are and impact a change to help you move to the right. So we can take somebody who is struggling, and over time, with the right interventions, we can get them to feel normal again. We can get somebody who is in the middle and just feels kind of blah. They're not really depressed, but they also aren't thriving. They also aren't, killing it every day. We can get that blah feeling person to feel better than they've ever felt before. In the early part of my career, let me move this again, I was more of like what you would call a sport nutritionist. So I worked with a lot of people who were up here. They were 9s on a scale of 1 to 10. And they even wanted to get better, right? They wanted to be a 9.1 or a 9.2 or a 9.3 because of the perspective of, if you have better mental fitness, you can have better physical fitness. You can have better physical performance. So when you're talking about an Olympic athlete where the difference between the gold medal and not even qualifying for the finals is less than a second in a lot of cases, having that mental edge allowed you to get that physical edge. There's room for everybody on this mental wellness continuum, and by addressing what's happening in the gut, we can change what happens not only in the brain but also in the body. And that's why I talk about this brain body biome sort of a thing. That there's things that we can do. We're not going to forget about the brain. There's certainly things we can do in the brain, mindset and mindfulness and meditation and all those sorts of things. But only focusing on the brain in your head, you're missing a lot of really important tools. And focusing on the second brain in the gut is one of those very important tools that we're learning more and more about. Okay, so that's the continuum. As soon as I start talking about two brains, unless you've heard this story before, you might be sitting there going, two brains? I know people who don't even have one brain, just because of how people are. But this idea of two brains and the gut-brain axis, when I started writing about this 20 years ago, we didn't know very much about the microbiome, certainly not as much as we know about it now. And the idea that what happened in your gut influenced anything more than just like digestion and nutrient absorption was really kind of a strange idea 20 or so years ago, certainly 30 years ago. Nowadays, I still wouldn't say that it's mainstream thinking. I still, have a lot of medical friends who, the gut is the gut and it doesn't affect the brain, and the brain is the brain and it's not influenced by your intestines. But that thinking is changing. We're starting to see gut interventions showing up as peer-reviewed scientific publications in psychology and psychiatry journals, and vice versa. That we're seeing this more of an integrated approach. So here's my book in the middle. Again, if you're interested in more of this kind of information, these are two other books that I highly recommend. This one, The Mind-Gut Connection by Emran Meyer. This one really is one of the sort of seminal books that really unpacks this two-way communication across the gut-brain axis between these two brains. And then this one, written by John Cryan and Ted Deenan, two Irish researchers, it really brings to fore this idea of psychobiotics, which we're going to talk about a bit as we get through the slides. This idea that we can intervene at the level of the microbiome to change psychology. And under that idea of psychology, we're talking about everything from, there are trials that look at major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder and ADHD and schizophrenia, and the list goes on. But what I'm more focused on are the people who just feel kind of blah, the people who are in the middle of that mental wellness continuum. They might be people that you counsel on a regular basis. We're not diagnosing, we're not treating diseases. We're really getting in there, and with a lifestyle orientation, we're helping those people feel better and perform better. And there's all kinds of ways we can do this. We're going to try to unpack some of it over the next little bit. So it makes sense to most people when we talk about the gut that if your microbiome is out of balance in your gut, if your bacteria, if you have too many, I'm going to say this very simply, just for effect. Let's say that you have dysbiosis, or your microbiome is dysbiotic. You have too many bad bacteria and you have not enough good bacteria, right? That's a very simplistic way of saying that your gut is out of balance, or your gut microbiome is out of balance. If that's out of balance, it makes logical sense that you're going to have gut issues. So you'll see things like, gut issues, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. You'll have garden variety, gas and bloating and digestive disturbances and, things like that. That's very sort of, straight line for most people, right? Very logical. Your gut's out of balance, you're experiencing these gut problems. But you see a graphic like this, and you see that what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. It permeates out into the rest of the body and eventually into the mind. So we start to see things like autoimmune problems like rheumatoid arthritis. You start to see metabolic problems like obesity and diabetes. And then you start to see some of the psychological and neurological problems. So psychological problems like depression, anxiety, autism, schizophrenia, and neurological problems like Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's disease. They're all related. And you could go right now. You could pause this presentation, go over to ChatGPT or Google or Perplexity or any of those search engines and type in microbiome and whatever condition you're interested in, and you're going to see dozens, in some cases hundreds, of different scientific publications showing not only a correlation, but very likely a causative relationship linkage, and in some cases you're going to see evidence for a therapeutic effect, where if we change what's happening at the level of the microbiome and the signaling across the gut-brain axis, you're going to see a benefit in that particular area. So the research in this particular area, microbiome, gut-brain axis, mental wellness, has been exploding over the last 5 years, particularly. Maybe we could say a whole decade. I have an auto search that comes into my email box every Friday, a PubMed search, and so it's automated. So every Friday morning, I open up my email and I have all of the microbiome mental wellness publications, peer-reviewed scientific journal publications that have happened that week. And it used to be, when I first set it up, 5 or 10 or 20. Now I have it set to give me no more than 200, and it maxes out over 200 every single week. I don't have time to look through more than 200 articles. So sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's 700. It will tell me how many there were that week, but it only gives me the first 200. So it's expanding very, very, very rapidly in all these different areas. So what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. And, it really became evident to me that we were on the cusp of this being a mainstream thing when I saw a report in one of my favorite research journals right here. the Wall Street Journal, right? Of course, this isn't a research journal at all. This is the world's largest business newspaper. And they ran an article December 21st, 2020, that was, here's the title: Feeling Depressed? Bacteria in your gut may be to blame. New studies point to the trillions of organisms in the human microbiome as playing an unexpectedly huge role in our well-being. And so this is, this is 5-ish years ago. And I thought, this is going to be it. This is the tipping point for everybody understanding that your mental wellness isn't just a brain thing; it's also a gut thing. And of course, you're watching this now, and we who are listening to this now are on the cutting edge of understanding this. It hasn't become a mainstream thing. It will eventually. Someday, people will go, well, of course. Everybody knows that what happens in your gut, your second brain, influences what happens in your head, your first brain. Someday that will be garden variety information that everybody understands and that our grandmothers will tell us, and et cetera, et cetera. But we're not there yet. We're still sort of on the cutting edge. This next slide, I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can hit pause and you can read through them. These are just excerpts from that Wall Street Journal article where I pulled them out and plopped them into a slide, and you can see mental health. I've colorized some of them. Mental health, hundreds of microbe species living in your gut, what we call the microbiome. Disorders including depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, autism spectrum disorder have significant disruptions in the composition of the gut microbiome. Neurotransmitters such as serotonin, I talked about just a minute ago, GABA to relieve anxiety, improve mood. By targeting microbes in the gut, we can impact behavioral effects that are going to have impact on overall well-being. So again, it's starting. People are starting to understand this at a more public health level, and it's good timing because the mental wellness problems in the world are at literally. I don't use this term in the wrong way here, I don't think, epidemic levels. So grim reality is that millions and millions of people are suffering with different kinds of mental wellness challenges. And it doesn't have to be a diagnosis. It doesn't have to be major depressive disorder. It doesn't have to be generalized anxiety disorder. It can just be feeling blah, or feeling down, or having brain fog, or being tired all day and then wired at night. These are all things that we can trace back biochemically to disruptions in the microbiome, or at least disruptions across the gut-brain axis, which I'll unpack for you in just a little bit. So big numbers. They affect men and women. They affect every age group. They particularly affect young people these days, adolescents and young adults. People are spending lots and lots of money on things to help them feel better. So that includes antidepressant drugs, anti-anxiety drugs, but it also includes things like alcohol and energy drinks and $7 coffees and all that kind of stuff, because we just don't feel the way that we want to feel, and we're trying to use things to help us feel better. What if we could use holistic nutrition? What if we could use a Mediterranean-style diet? What if we could use different prebiotic fibers or postbiotic nutrients or probiotic strains to help with the signaling across the gut-brain axis? So more of those statistics. I'm not gonna go through every single one of them. Suffice to say, it is a big problem in the world, and there's a massive need for us as nutrition professionals to provide some advice and some modalities and some suggestions for people to change what they're eating, to try to change what's happening in the gut, to try to change what's happening in the gut-brain axis, to try to change what's happening in terms of their overall mood state. So the World Health Organization calls stress, as sort of a umbrella term for all of these things that we're talking about, the health epidemic of the 21st century. And if there is a silver lining to all those dismal statistics that you just saw in the last couple of slides, it is that it's starting to become a mainstream story. So even if the gut-brain axis microbiome portion of that story hasn't become mainstream yet, it has become mainstream for people to talk about mental wellness as sort of a national conversation, right? You see lots of celebrities, you see actors, you see recording artists, you see all kinds of people who have a platform starting to talk about their own mental wellness challenges. And I think that is good for the average person because I'm old enough to remember where mental wellness problems were something that were taboo. You didn't talk about them. You didn't talk about your mood. You didn't talk about your stress except to say, "I'm really stressed out and I'm so busy," and it was almost like a badge of honor kind of a thing. Nowadays, that is changing, and I thank the younger generation, the people who are in the age group of my kids, young adults. They want more work-life balance. They want to have not be 24/7 tied to their job and their career and things like that. And I think that's actually a healthy thing. So mental wellness becoming a national conversation, I think, is going to be a very, very healthy discussion for us all to have. This chart comes from the Global Wellness Institute, and what they do is they try to put numbers to each of the categories that we would call wellness. And so they've got, you can see some of the big ones: healthy eating, nutrition, and weight loss. This is a big category. It's over $1 trillion. Personal care and beauty is also over $1 trillion. Physical activity, gyms and fitness centers and things like that, is almost $1 trillion. You look at mental wellness, and in the most recent numbers they've gathered, which is 2024 numbers, it's $181 billion, which is still a pretty big number. It's small in comparison to some of these other more well-established, but remember, it's new. People really weren't defining a mental wellness category until relatively recently. Two things I want to tell you about the mental wellness category as defined here by the Global Wellness Institute. This is the only one that actually grew over the COVID pandemic. All the other ones shrunk in terms of their overall size and number of people participating and dollars spent and things like that. So this is the only one that grew during the pandemic, and this is the one that has the rapidest, the most prominent year-over-year projections for the next 5 years. So mental wellness is going to be growing faster, double digits, 14, 15% year over year over year for at least the next 5 years. So this will actually reach close to $300 billion by 2030, which is a very, very large number. So lots of people in the category, lots of people taking a look at it. And what a number like this tells us is that a lot of people are looking for mental wellness solutions, right? They're looking for a natural solution for their mood or for their fatigue or for their brain fog or for whatever falls under that category of mental wellness. What I measure in the research that I do as psychological mood states, which we're going to talk about too as we go through here. Okay. So another couple of key concepts about mental wellness. I showed you the mental wellness continuum and that everybody is on that continuum. Mental wellness isn't a black and white sort of a thing. It's shades of gray, if you will. But some of these other key concepts are this. It's an active process. It's not a one and done. It's not a silver bullet, treat it and the problem goes away sort of an issue. Active process. It's integrated and holistic in nature. So depending on the signal that we're talking about, if it's a neurotransmitter signal or if it's a inflammatory signal or if it's a nervous system signal or whatever the case may be, we want to integrate as many of those signals as possible. And nutrition is one of the most integrated multi-signal approaches that we can take. So nutrition is going to be the main thing that we're going to be talking about towards the end in terms of like what can we actually do to effectuate a positive change in somebody's mental well-being, integrated and holistic. And then this last one I think is really important for the kind of work that we all do. People are looking for non-clinical strategies. And part of this is because, natural is kind of having a moment right now. People are looking for that kind of stuff. But the other reason for it is that the things that have been on offer to change how we feel for so many years chief among which is, things like antidepressant drugs and anti-anxiety drugs. Lots of people have tried those and found that they don't work particularly well. So I'm not an anti-pharmaceutical person. I'm glad that they're there for the minority of situations that need those sort of approaches. But they're very well, they're not integrated and holistic in nature. And one of the ways I try to describe this is that mental well-being is a multifactorial issue. It might be your neurotransmitters, like a serotonin or a dopamine, but your neurotransmitters might be actually fine. They're just being blocked in how they work by stress hormones like cortisol or inflammatory markers like cytokines. So you could say, well, it's not a neurotransmitter problem; it's an inflammatory problem. Well, where's that inflammation coming from? It could be that your immune system is out of balance. Either your immune system is suppressed or your immune system is agitated and overactive. Well, what's causing that immune system problem? That could be a gut integrity problem. Could be a problem with your barrier function in your gut, what some people would call leaky gut. Well, why is that out of balance? Why is your gut leaky? Well, it could be a problem with your balance between your good bacteria and your bad bacteria. It could be a gut microbiome dysbiosis. It could be any of those or all of those, and they all have a different impact on your physical health and your mental well-being. So, integrated and holistic, this multifactorial problem, you don't want to come at it with one thing like a Prozac or a Xanax or something like that. Again, not to say that those aren't effective. They're just effective in a different way. They're doing something different. They're the wrong tool for the job. They are not a multifactorial approach like a nutrition program would be, or a lifestyle program, or a sleep hygiene program, or et cetera, right? So that idea of non-clinical strategies, because they're multifactorial in nature, are sort of seem to be tailor-made for this multifactorial problem that we're broadly calling mental wellness dysfunction or mental wellness problems. Okay, so on that note, when we're talking about these things, when we're talking about mental wellness problems, it's important for us to make the distinction that we're not talking about mental illnesses, right? None of us are trying to be licensed mental wellness counselors. One of the things that I do is I train certified mental wellness coaches. And so some of those people start off as, nutritionists or personal trainers or dietitians or some allied health professional, nurses. We get a lot of NPs, we get a lot of naturopaths, that kind of stuff into the program. And we're very careful to say, look, we're not treating depression, the disease. We're not treating anxiety, the disease. But depression and anxiety are also just mood states that we all have. When you wake up in the morning and you say, I'm a little depressed today, you didn't just diagnose yourself with major depressive disorder. You're talking about an emotion. You're talking about a mood state. And so that distinction is very important for us to understand, that this dual axis paradigm, we're not working along this x-axis, this mental illness where we're trying to cure a disease. We're working on this y-axis, this up and down axis, where we're trying to move people away from languishing, which is the bottom of that mental wellness continuum. Sometimes we call languishing, sometimes we call it burnout. And we're trying to move them up. So this one's going up. The mental wellness continuum was going, left to right. There's all kinds of ways that we can describe this, but we're trying to meet somebody where they are and move them towards flourishing, or move them towards vigor, which is the opposite of burnout. And the best, the most effective way to do that is what we just saw on the last slide, which is exactly what everybody's looking for: an active process, integrated and holistic in nature, using non-clinical strategies, which tend to be multifactorial in how they work. Okay, so there's that, and then you ask yourself the question of, well, how do we do that? How do we move somebody from a bad place to a better place and a better place and a better place? One of the ways to do it is with natural therapies. So a good part of my career, I have studied traditional Chinese medicine, traditional Indian medicine or Ayurveda, traditional Japanese medicine, what is called Kampo, And in every culture that you look at around the world, there is some way of describing vigor or flourishing or thriving or something like that in whatever that local language is, right? So in I just used a few of those words. In positive psychology research, we'll say vigor or we'll say flourishing. In traditional Chinese medicine, they will say qi. That is the life force that is in your body. In Ayurveda, it's prana, which means the breath. So there's all kinds of ways to do this, and that can be herbals, it can be the baseline diet, it can be using fermented foods. There's a whole bunch of ways that we can do that, and I really feel strongly about this. Not just because I'm a nutritional biochemist, and not just because you all are a nutrition audience, but nutrition is the way to go when we're talking about changing this signaling, because anytime we eat something, anytime we consume a food or drink a beverage, it is a direct interaction with what's happening here at the level of the gut, right? Those signals in the food become signals in the microbiome, and those become signals throughout the rest of the body and the brain. And so it's a direct, it's an immediate, it's an intimate interaction with that signaling system that we're trying to modulate in the right direction. We can also modulate it in the wrong direction by choosing the wrong foods, right? If we're eating the standard American diet, which I'll talk about in a second, that's going to send a whole different set of signals through the gut-brain axis and lead us more towards not feeling great, right? Standard American diet, SAD, sad. It's more likely to make us sad versus other ways that we'll talk about that can help change our mental well-being. So what you see on the screen right now is one of several different graphics that I have throughout this slide set to show you different ways of gut-brain axis signaling. And one thing that depending on the graphic that I use, the graphic will be emphasizing different aspects of those signaling pathways. The thing that you really have to always keep in mind is that it is multi-directional signaling. So we might be talking about, delivering a fiber into the gut, and that fiber ends up being the food source, the source of nourishment for particular bacteria in the gut. And then because they've eaten that food, they will produce a signaling molecule like a short chain fatty acid, for example. And then that will have signaling qualities through the vagus nerve or, up to the neurons or, wherever. But the signaling is very rarely just unidirectional. It's never just gut to brain. Sometimes it's brain to gut. Sometimes it's gut to immune system to brain. Sometimes it's gut to a cytokine to brain. Sometimes it's brain to adrenal glands to gut. So it's a multi-signaling, multi-directional system. And that's why I'll say this a few times, and I think I have a specific slide about this concept of not only being multifactorial, but having to think of it as a system and think of it as if someone's not as happy as they want to be, it's not just a serotonin issue. It's a systems issue. Maybe you have plenty of serotonin, but it can't get to where it needs to get in terms of its target receptor. Maybe it's being blocked. Maybe it's getting there, but something else is getting in the way. So you can almost think of this as a biochemical dominoes game where one signal sets off the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one. And you can set them off in a good direction. You can set them off in a bad direction. You can set them off halfway and then they stop for whatever reason. So it can get a little bit complicated unless we think about it from this systems perspective and we say, you know what, where are we going to intervene with the biggest impact on the most signals simultaneously? Leads us back to this idea of functional nutrition. Okay, so here what you're seeing are I'll just point out a couple of important pieces here. So when we're talking about the gut-brain axis, there's multiple moving parts. So it's not just the bacteria in the gut, what we call the microbiome. It is also the integrity of the gut. So we'll talk about that when we talk about leaky gut. It's also the reason that we call good bacteria and bad bacteria is mostly because of the kinds of signaling molecules that they make. The bad bacteria tend to make inflammatory molecules, inflammatory cytokines, and those can lead us to be, have physical pain, but also have psychological pain. Like, they're being overinflamed, neuroinflammation is linked to depression and anxiety. But the good bacteria, they'll tend to make anti-inflammatory cytokines. They'll tend to make short chain fatty acids, which have metabolic benefits and mood benefits and gut integrity benefits and etc. They'll tend to make neurotransmitters. And so, it really is they're not just bad in and of themselves. We call them good and bad because of the nature of the signaling molecules that they make. So the microbes are a piece of this system. The metabolites that they make are a piece of this system. So here you're seeing short chain fatty acids, you're seeing tryptophan metabolites, one of which would be serotonin. Here we're seeing gut hormones being produced. That can be influenced by the bacteria that are there. Can also be influenced by the integrity of the gut. So the gut lining is an important piece of this. Peptides are also having sort of a moment now. Peptides are just signaling molecules, right? There's a peptide to signal your appetite, like GLP-1. There are peptides to signal muscle growth. There are peptides to signal immune system vigilance. There are peptides to signal, all sorts of things, right? So I see out in the world, people are going like breathlessly talking about peptides. And I kind of look at it and go, yeah, well, peptides for what? They can do different things, but before you go and start taking a peptide, like a synthetic version of a peptide, a lot of times by injection, maybe we should look at this system and see if we can naturally use nutrients to change our peptide production, change our peptide delivery, change our peptide signaling at their target tissues. We have the nervous system as one of the portions of this communication network. One of those very important nerves is the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a hardwired connection between your gut and your brain. And so we can activate the vagus nerve by deep breathing, but we can also activate the vagus nerve by what is happening in our gut. So we'll come back to that. Stress hormones like cortisol that's coming from the adrenal gland, glucocorticoids, the immune system. We think of the immune system today a lot different than we did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we didn't understand the immune system as well as we do now, but we thought the immune system was really just a shield. It protected us from viruses and bacteria and cancer cells and things like that. Immune system vigilance was and still is an important thing. But now we understand the immune system as a communication organ across the gut-brain axis. So 70% of your immune system is in your gut. And part of the reason for that is that you want your immune system in constant contact with your microbiome and with all the things that we're delivering to the gut every time we eat, right? Every time we eat, that food or that beverage could be contaminated with something that is very dangerous for the body, some pathogen, and you want your immune system to be right there. So your immune system and your microbiome are in constant communication with each other about, what's the environment of the gut? Is it good? Is it bad? But that information then gets taken by the immune system and transmitted throughout the rest of the body. Does it set off a stress response? Does it set off a relaxation response? Does it go up to the brain and set off a depression signal or an antidepressant signal? The immune system really is this almost like a cellular and biochemical Pony Express system throughout your body and eventually up to your mind. So that's an important piece of it. And let's not forget about the brain. We've all experienced the brain communicating down to the gut. When you feel nervous, when you feel tense, you might lose your appetite for a little while. When you've been stressed out chronically for a while, you might have a ramped up appetite and you might be seeking comfort foods and things like that. So, the brain has an effect on what's going on in the gut. The gut has an effect on what's going on in the brain. And, the axis in between, that word axis, when we talk about the gut, there's things we can do in the gut. When we talk about the brain, there's things we can do in the brain to help people feel better. But the axis isn't just a throwaway word. The axis refers to all of that communication machinery, the endocrine signals and the cytokine signals and the nervous system and the circulatory system and the endocannabinoid system. So it's the communication network between your two brains. Okay, so I hope that wasn't too much, because the sort of moral of that story is that yes, it can get complicated if you want it to, but it also gives us a multitude of places that we can intervene using natural options, chief of which is nutrition, to change and modulate those signals in the direction that we want. Okay, so here's another way of looking at that. I told you I was going to use multiple graphics. So here's another little more simplistic way. But what happens in the gut is going to affect all of these different things that we put under the umbrella of mental wellness. Okay, so I already mentioned the pharmaceutical thing a little bit. We've known that pharmaceuticals don't work particularly well for most people. So it's a minority of people that this is the right tool for the job. And we've known this for a long time. What is the date on this paper? 2009. So these are things that are not secrets. And if you know someone who's ever had to struggle through, finding the right antidepressant medication therapy, it's hit or miss, right? It's trial and error a lot of times. Try this dose of this particular drug, and we'll see how you do after a couple of months. Oh, it didn't work. Let's try a larger dose of that drug. Oh, that didn't work. Let's switch you to this other drug at this dose, this dose. So it can be a very frustrating process, probably for the reason that I said before, that in this multifactorial problem, it's only addressing one little piece that may or may not be the piece that needs addressing in that particular person. So circle back around to multifactorial problem needs a multifactorial intervention. People ask me sometimes, how do we know that the microbiome is causally involved in mental well-being versus not just related? Is it really the thing that is driving the change in mental well-being, or is it just correlated, right? Correlation versus causation. And we know this from studies that have been done about 20 years ago, where you can actually switch the microbiome between different kinds of rodents, chiefly in these kinds of experiments, mice, where you can take the microbiome from one mouse and put it into another mouse. And what happens is that mouse that received the transplant, the fecal microbiome transplant, FMT, they basically take on the behaviors, the biology, the biochemistry, the psychology of that donor animal. So here's an example. You take an obese microbiome, you put it into a lean mouse. That lean mouse becomes obese. They eat more, they exercise less, they steal food from their litter mates, they hide food for later, they take on all the attributes of the obese mouse. And it goes back the other way. People always ask me that. Could you take a lean microbiome and put it into an obese mouse? Yes, that obese mouse becomes lean, but, and how should I say this? You have to maintain the leanness. That obese microbiome will start to retake over the lean microbiome unless that lean mouse now stays physically active. They run on the wheel. They have to, eat the proper diet. They have to do all the things to maintain that leanness. Otherwise, the obese microbiome, in a sense, is stronger in certain ways, so it starts to re-exert itself. But it's possible. But that isn't really what I want to talk about. You can say that and go, well, you can change metabolism. Can you really change behavior? Can you change psychology in the same way. And yeah, those same kinds of studies have been done with psychology. So here you can take a kind of mouse that is more of an introvert. It doesn't like to socialize with the other mice. It doesn't like to go on the wheel and run. It doesn't like to go out and play with its litter mates and go out into the arms of the maze and things like that. So you can take its microbiome, a shy mouse, and you can put it into an extroverted mouse, a mouse that does like to sort of be the life of the party, and it does like to exercise a lot, and it does like to explore different parts of the cage and go way out there on the different arms of the maze and things like that. And you switch their microbiomes, and you take an introvert and put it into an extrovert, and the extrovert becomes an introvert, and you can take it back the other way as well. So you can show that you can swap psychologies by swapping the microbiome. And then people will say, well, fine, that's great for mice, but does it actually work for humans? Humans are, much more complex and much more, complicated. And yeah, the same sort of thing happens for humans. And so here, the study is looking at the microbiome of people with depression, major depressive disorder, and non-depressed normal happiness controls. And you can see that like this is a lot of gobbledygook, but it's showing you here's major depressive disorder and here's all the different species of bacteria in their microbiome. And you can see that this pattern is different than the non-depressed controls. And when you graph it this way, you can see that the ones in red, the major depressive disorder, have a different a biotic makeup than the blue. Where's my cursor? There, than the blue. So they're different. There's something different about those microbiome structures and functions, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. The difference between microbiome structure and function is the structure is who's there, like what bacteria are there, how many of this species, how many of that species. The other part that's really important is what are they doing? So what metabolites are they producing? Are they producing more serotonin and therefore you're happier? Are they producing more inflammatory cytokines and therefore you're less happy or more sad or more irritable or more tense or something like that? So some of what we're looking at when we measure the microbiome is looking at who's there, the actual bacteria. But I think a lot of it really depends on what are they doing? What are those metabolites that they're making? And not to preempt what I'm gonna say later. We can tune that microbiome to make more GABA, for example, to help people calm down, or make more serotonin to make people less sad, or make more dopamine so people are less fatigued, right? Those data exist now, and I'll show you some of that as we go through. But in this particular trial, what they did was they took the microbiomes from depressed humans and put it into normal mice, and those normal mice became depressed, or at least exhibited what it says here, depressive-like behaviors. They lose their appetite, they don't want to exercise, they don't want to socialize, they just sort of go sit in the corner of the cage and sleep most of the day. So you can't ask a mouse, is it happy or sad, but you can observe what it does, and it acts like it's depressed after it gets a microbiome from a depressed human. So with all of that, you can sort of broadly put your gut-brain axis into a good category, what you see here in the green, or you can put it into a bad category. And again, part of it is the bacteria. Who's there. Part of it is what are they producing, the metabolites. Part of it is the integrity of the gut, what we would call leaky gut. Part of it is the state of the immune system. Is your immune system balanced, what we would call primed, or is it underactive or overactive? Is it suppressed or agitated? All of that has bearing on the signals that are eventually getting up into the brain and determining ultimately how I feel and how I show up in a given situation and how I behave and conduct myself in the world. It all stemming from this kind of bottom up kind of a thinking. Okay, let's talk about leaky gut real quick. So leaky gut is one of those things that depending on who you ask, it exists or it doesn't exist. So I usually tell my coaches, use this term leaky gut with caution. Because in some sectors of the medical establishment, as soon as you utter that terminology, leaky gut, you're going to be thought of as a crazy person, right? Because so I have gastroenterology friends who will say things like, leaky gut isn't a thing. If it were a thing, we would see it. Like when we're doing our colonoscopies. If it were a thing, there'd be a drug for it. But it absolutely is a thing. And it basically is this. In your gut, you should normally have these normal tight junctions. Each individual enterocyte, each individual cell that makes up your gastrointestinal lining, it's one cell thick. So think of something thinner than saran wrap that is holding all that food in your gut so it can be digested and absorbed and maintain your microbiome in that gut lumen so it's not in your circulation. So it's a very vital barrier between the outside world and the inside world of your body. It's very easily damaged, and if these tight junctions become quote unquote leaky or somehow disrupted, that's going to allow things to slip through from the gut lumen into the systemic circulation. When that happens, your immune system overreacts, or your immune system reacts as it should to something that shouldn't be in the circulation. And so you get immune system activation and you get inflammation. And that can lead to problems. That can lead to autoimmune system problems. It can lead to just garden variety fatigue or brain fog. Oh, you can see some of them here. Inflammation, autoimmunity, malabsorption, and nutrient deficiencies. I will also say to people that if you have a leaky gut, you almost definitely have leaky brain. And so you'll see another slide in just a second where it shows what happens in the gut eventually results in either neurodegeneration or neurogenesis. So what happens in the gut is taking your brain in a positive direction or a negative direction. So the question will become, well, how do I know if I have leaky gut? There are tests that we can do. We can do blood tests for certain things. I don't always recommend them because they're highly variable. So I'm not really going to talk about that right now. But you can judge based on what your exposure might be in the environment. So here's some of the triggers that can cause leaky gut. Different dietary proteins that you may or may not be able to digest. Like some people can't do dairy, some people can't do gluten, some people can't do other sorts of things. Changes in your enzyme digestive enzyme profiles, antibiotics for sure, because that can cause all sorts of havoc with your microbiome and with your gut lining. Infections, blood sugar issues, antibodies. But look at some of these. Pregnancy can lead to leaky gut. Stress can lead to leaky gut. Menopause, toxins, food allergies, etc. So there's a lot of potential exposure that can damage that very susceptible one cell layer thick tissue. And once that gut barrier function is breached, right? Once you become overly permeable, the gut lining should be semi-permeable, right? There's certain things we do want to get across, right? We want the nutrients to get across. We want water to get across for hydration. We want, electrolytes and things like that to get across. But there's most things we want to only be selectively permeable. And that's why we have things like active transport of different minerals and amino acids and those sorts of things. But, just to show you that this is not a figment of your imagination, leaky gut is a real thing. And it's such a real thing that there have been enough studies over the years that we know pretty precisely the chain of events that leads from something happening in the gut to something happening in the brain, and leaky gut is going to be a piece of this. So we can take the standard American diet. That's going to be our damaging event. And we'll talk about standard American diet in just a second. What you eat is going to change your gut flora. So that standard American diet is going to grow a different population of bacteria compared to a Mediterranean diet, for example. So standard American diet changes the gut flora. That increases the permeability. It makes your gut more leaky. That increases the absorption of something called LPS. LPS stands for lipopolysaccharide. That is a compound in the cell wall of a bacteria that should stay in your microbiome. That increases something called endotoxemia, which is just basically toxins in the endotoxin, which is what LPS is, in the blood, emia. That leads to inflammation. That leads to metabolic and psychologic disorders. So this can just as easily lead to prediabetes as it can lead to depression and anxiety and brain fog and some of those sorts of things. And so if we know so much about this, how do we know so much about this? We know so much about it from trials like this, and this is just one example of dozens and dozens of trials that have been done where you have an intervention to solve the problem of leaky gut. So here's leaky gut, right? This is a tight junction. This is a loose junction where things are getting across that shouldn't get across. So that's, so you can call it leaky gut. You can call it poor barrier function. You can call it here, this IP is impaired intestinal permeability. So there's lots of ways to describe it. What we're trying to do here is improve the intestinal permeability, or to improve the barrier function, or to reduce the leaky gut. So lots of ways to describe that. And in this particular trial, the way that they did that was to induce or to intervene with something that they called a PR diet, a polyphenol-rich diet. So they gave people a diet that was rich in apples, high in quercetin, pomegranates, high in things like ellagic acid and punicolagens, green tea that's high in catechins, chocolate, coffee, and chocolate that are high in proanthocyanidins, citrus fruit that is high in, what is citrus fruit high in? Polymethoxylated flavones, blueberries that are high in a variety of different flavonoids. So what you're doing is getting a diet that's high in these nutrients that can be protective for the gut microbiota, have signaling qualities of their own. They can have prebiotic effects. They can have protection effects. They have antioxidant benefits. They have anti-inflammatory benefits. So reason I'm rattling these off really quickly is because that dietary intervention is multifactorial signaling that you're applying to a multifactorial problem tailor-made for the issue at hand. And what they found was zonulin went down. This is one of the things that you can measure to get a handle on how leaky the gut is. Zonulin is something that should be only in the gut, and when we see it in the bloodstream, it indicates that it has quote unquote leaked across. So that indicates some degree of leakiness. Polyphenol intake went up, obviously, because that's the kind of food that they gave. Blood pressure went down. Butyrate producing bacteria went up. So that's a prebiotic effect where you gave this polyphenol and that caused the growth of a particular class of bacteria, a quote unquote good bacteria that is good because it's making more of this short chain fatty acid called butyrate, which is good for your blood sugar control, and it's good for your appetite regulation, and it's good for your barrier function, and it's good for your it's good for neurogenesis in the brain. It helps to protect neurons and grow new neurons. So lots of really good stuff is happening if you're using the right foods to solve the leaky gut. So the next question. Let me see how many more slides I have left. The next question becomes, where do supplements fit in, right? Because a lot of times when we talk about gut health, the very next thing is and the next breath is, well, what probiotics should I take? And that isn't always the place where you need to go. I'm an advocate of dietary supplements if there's good research. I've been advocating this program for more than 20 years, probably 30 years at this point, what I call the SENSE program. And supplements fit at the top of that. So SENSE is supplements, exercise, nutrition, sleep, evaluation. The first letter of all of that spells the SENSE program. Supplements are first, not because they're the most important and not because they're going to replace the need for a good balanced diet or replace the need for exercise or etc. They're first because I really feel if you can get an effective properly formulated supplement, it can help enhance the other pieces of the sense program. So if you can get a supplement that helps somebody with their motivation and their exercise, they might be more likely, or motivation and energy, they might be more likely, more inclined to become physically active. Whereas before they might have said, I don't have the energy, I don't have the motivation. If you can supplement them to a point where they feel more motivated to exercise, they're going to exercise more. If you can get a supplement that helps them with their appetite and craving modulation, for example, we can give an Akkermansia strain of probiotic bacteria that can increase GLP-1 production naturally, and that's going to help them with their appetite and their cravings and their food noise and things like that in a different way than something like Ozempic or Wegovy or something like that is going to. It's a very distinct matter of degree. The supplements aren't going to be like those medications, but you can start to change those signals in the positive direction, and now they're more likely to be less inclined to go stress eating or less inclined to choose a standard American diet, and maybe they're more inclined to choose a salad for one meal of the day, etc. Right? So same thing. You can use a supplement to help somebody relax, and they'll sleep better, and then that better sleep changes their mood state the next day. So the supplements can sometimes be almost like that easy button for a lot of our clients to say, okay, now I've got a little bit of bandwidth. Now I'm going to do that diet thing. Now I'm going to do that exercise thing. Now I'm going to do that sleep hygiene thing. And ideally, what we want them to do is all of it. And we're trying to figure out what is the best regimen for that particular client. Okay, so that's that. But when we do talk about the supplements, one of the most important considerations when we're talking about probiotic supplements is something that I call strain designation. So this is some nomenclature around probiotic strains in some popular products that I'm sure you've all seen before. You may even recommend them to some of your clients now. So this one is Culturelle. This one is Activia, what some people call the poop yogurt. And this one is another product called Align. Culturelle is really good for traveler's diarrhea. It's really good for gastrointestinal regulation. So if you're constipated, Culturelle can help you go to the bathroom. If you are going to the bathroom too much, you have diarrhea, Culturelle can help you go less, right? So because it regulates gastrointestinal function on sort of both ends of that spectrum. Activia is bifidus regularis, can really help with regularity. So that's why it's jokingly called the poop yogurt. You eat more of this and it helps you go to the bathroom. Align actually has strains that help with overall immune system vigilance. So this can help keep your immune system strong, would be a sort of a balance claim for that kind of thing. But those benefits in those particular products are not because it has probiotics, but because it has a particular strain of probiotic bacteria. So in Culturelle, it's lactic-casei-bacillus, what we used to call lactobacillus. Rhamnosus is the species. So genus, species, strain designation. Every probiotic should have 3 names: first name, middle name, last name. And it's the last name, that strain designation, that really tells us what it does. So let me give you an example. Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG is Culturelle, good for gastrointestinal regulation. There's a Lactobacillus rhamnosus R0011 that I've used in formulations for various companies that is an anti-stress strain. So we know it's anti-stress because we know it will lower cortisol levels, body's primary stress hormone, and it will raise GABA levels, body's primary relaxing neurotransmitter. So you're less stressed and more relaxed. And when you supplement with that, you can measure that outcome subjectively in people who get it. They're calmer in a variety of ways. There's another Lactobacillus rhamnosus. The strain designation is GR1 that is really good for women with recurrent vaginal yeast infections. So the list can go on and on and on, right? There's like the strain is different. GG does gastrointestinal motility. GR1 does yeast infections. R0011 does anti-stress. So the strain designation is really, really important for people to understand. And nowadays, I put this eye chart up here just to make the point that now there are lots and lots of different psychobiotics. I don't think any of these were around 20 years ago. And now you can look down all the list of the different strains and what they do: schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, psychological distress, mood disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism spectrum disorders, vascular dementia. So we're seeing psychological effects, we're seeing neurological effects, we're seeing performance effects. There's lots and lots and lots of them. When I started doing this, looking at the gut-brain axis and looking at specific interventions, there really was just this one right here. If you can see my cursor, this is a brand called Microbiome. I don't have any relationships with any of these companies or anything like that. I've formulated with some of these in different products for different clients before, but I don't have any consulting arrangements or anything like that. Microbiome was one of the very first psychobiotics on the market. It's made by a company called Lallemand. It has two different strains, and and in fact, I have a slide that sort of outlines these strains. But Microbiome was the only one that was around. But now there's one called Bifazin. There's one called the GABA probiotic from a company called Verb. Then you can see papers coming out that are scientific reviews that will talk about all the different ones that are there. So now we have a choice of a couple of dozen at this point different psychobiotic bacteria, and so that's both good and bad. The good is that it gives us more choice. The bad is, well, which one do I choose? If I want to help my client feel better, quote unquote feel better, which one do I recommend to them? And part of that decision is based on understanding the mechanism of action, understanding what part of that gut-brain axis system you want to intervene at. If you suspect that it's a microbiome disruption, dysbiosis, maybe we want to intervene with fiber instead of a particular strain. If it's something that is a neuroinflammation, maybe we want to intervene with some anti-inflammatory diets or anti-inflammatory nutrients. Maybe it's a omega-3 that we're recommending, or it's a black cumin seed oil or something like that. So understanding the mechanism is really important that we're going for, because these different mechanisms of action, some of these strains are going to work on tamping down the stress response. Some are going to work on the immune system response. Some are going to work on neurotransmitter production. Some are going to work on shoring up the barrier integrity. So some are going to work on production of short chain fatty acids. So understanding the multi-dimensional signaling pathways is really important for the interventions that we're going to be recommending to our clients. Okay, so here are some of the strains that I have the most experience with. So here's Microbiome, a French company called Lallemand, Lactobacillus helveticus 52, Bifidobacterium longum 175, 3 billion colony-forming units a day. That's the amount that's been used in the clinical trials to show benefits for antidepressant effects, anti-anxiety effects, things like that. Here's a blend of 4 different strains from an Italian company, Probiotical. This is called Bifazin. So you won't find these as products on the market. You'll find these as ingredients inside of other products. So if you might have a full script account where you have a dispensary, or you might recommend that your client goes and finds a particular name of a product. Make sure that that product carries this particular one or this particular one or that particular one. So Bifazin is a blend of 4 at 4 billion CFUs a day. GABA probiotic is from a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts called Verb. They have a plantarum strain that is a really good GABA producer. So plantarum strains in general produce GABA, but this particular strain produces GABA at something like 3 times what the other strains typically do. That's a 5 billion CFU per day as the effective dose. And so the question becomes this: it becomes, if your objective is to help your client feel better, quote unquote feel better, what way are we trying to get them to feel better? Do they want to see an improvement in their mood or a lowering of their stress? Or, a lot of the people that I work with, they don't want any less stress. They want to be able to handle stress better. So they don't want something that's going to calm them. They want something that is going to improve their resilience so they can handle more stress. Those are different interventions. Some people might want sleep. Well, there's a resilience right there. Strain specificity, because there's a strain for that. Is the sort of moral of that story. But it's not just strains. It's not just bacteria that we're talking about. We're not talking only about the probiotics, right? Those are the bacteria. We also have to talk about all these other biotics that we have out there. We have prebiotics, which are fibers that are the food for the probiotics. You're seeing a lot of companies start to launch synbiotics, S-Y-N, synergistic biotics, where they'll combine probiotic strains with prebiotic fibers. So you're giving the bacteria and the bacteria's food. It's important that those companies match them up the right way. So, there's particular bacteria that prefer to eat, galacto-oligosaccharide. And then there's other bacteria that can eat galacto-oligosaccharide if they want to, but they really would prefer a galactomannan. Or an inulin, or a fructoooligosaccharide, or et cetera, et cetera. So the bacteria actually have a preferred fuel source, or said the other way, a particular fuel source will preferentially feed different kinds of bacteria. And that speaks directly to the fact that when I talk about fiber in just a second, it's not just about fiber, it's about different kinds of fiber. And a diversity of fiber is going to give us a diversity in our microbiome. And this idea of postbiotics, these are the signaling molecules that the bacteria will produce if they're given the right food. So these are all linked in together. I also have this idea of phytobiotics, the idea that different kinds of plant extracts, like the polyphenol-rich diet that I talked about a few minutes ago, in its regard to solving the problem of leaky gut. Those phytobiotics will have signaling qualities of their own, but they'll also have signaling qualities the way postbiotics would, because they can protect and stimulate different aspects of probiotic metabolism. So these are all the biotics, and what we have to think of when we're talking about these is, how does it work? What's its mechanism of action? What is its onset of action? Because people are going to say, well, all right, if I start taking this probiotic, how quickly until I feel better? How quickly until my mood is improved? How quickly until my stress is lower? How quickly until I'm sleeping better again? All those are valid questions, and all these different mood states have different time courses. So you can think of, some things we can change in an hour. So you could give somebody theanine, L-theanine, amino acid, and in an hour, if you gave them the right dose and the right quality and things like that, in an hour, you can see a shift in their brainwave patterns out of beta waves where they're agitated and anxious into alpha waves where they're calm and relaxed and sort of in the zone. So that's like, they feel better. And you can see I'm doing this in quotes. They feel better because they're more relaxed and alert and less tense and irritable. But that didn't do anything to their degree of depression or their anxiety or their brain fog or their motivation or their fatigue or any of that kind of stuff. Those take a little bit longer. And usually when we're talking about changing the microbiome, who's there, the structure, or its functionality, what it's producing, we might be talking about 4, 6, 8 weeks until we see that sort of a change. And so if you're thinking about the mode of action and the onset of action, you can think of phytobiotics and postbiotics as generally working quicker, so hours to days, whereas prebiotics and probiotics tend to work longer or take longer to work, weeks to months. And so this is a concept that I refer to as phased benefits. If we're strategic in what we recommend to our clients, we can say, you know what, we're going to help you feel better almost immediately in these certain ways. And if you will stay on the regimen of, eating more of these foods and maybe supplementing with this amino acid or that probiotic strain or that fiber or whatever the case may be, we can help you feel more better after a few days, and more better after a couple weeks, and more better after a couple of months, because maybe their stress goes down after a day, and now their brain fog goes away after a week, and now their resilience improves after 2 or 3 weeks, and now their depression and anxiety go down after 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So that idea of phased benefits, the person getting better and better and better, just because of the nature of how those mood states manifest. Okay, so that's and we can put together whatever those symbiotics are. Almost done here. I want to share with you something that's really impactful, just to make the point that what happens in the gut has huge ramifications for what happens in the rest of the body, including the brain. So this is a graphic that describes a bunch of different studies that have been done, all along the same idea of using something like autism, which is a gut-brain axis dysfunction. There's problems going on in the brain. There's problems going on in the gut. There's problems going on in the axis, the signaling mechanisms, and you have a wide variety of severity, wide variety of different symptoms. If we sort of pare that down and we use mice with autism features, just to use it as a research model, we can show that there are changes across all those portions of the gut-brain axis, but we can use probiotic treatment in those mice to change what's happening at the level of the microbiome. That improves the barrier integrity, right? So less leaky gut. That changes the signaling molecules, the metabolites that are going across the axis in the circulation, across the immune system, across the blood-brain barrier, etc. And that changes their behavior. It makes those mice have fewer autistic behaviors. So just like the microbiome transplants that I started this presentation off with, we're seeing the same sort of a trajectory of change the microbiome, change the gut integrity, change the signals, change the behavior. And again, the question has been, up until recently, well, that's great for these mice, but would that same thing happen in humans? And yes, the same thing happens to a degree in humans. There are clinical trials underway, different parts of the world, looking at fecal microbiome transplants in adults and children with autism, and across the whole autism spectrum. And the results so far have been kind of so-so, to be perfectly honest, and nobody knows why. Is it because it's harder to change a microbiome? Is it harder for, are there other signals that are out of balance, or the signals changed here? Are they not getting to where they need to have their effect? There's a whole variety of reasons for why doing a simple intervention like a microbiome transplant doesn't solve all the problems. But here's something that is really interesting, exciting. These are fiber interventions in kids with autism spectrum disorders. This one on top was done in 2018 in the UK using a particular kind of fiber, prebiotic fiber called a galacto-oligosaccharide, a GOS. The one on the bottom was done also in 2018 in Japan using a different kind of fiber called a galactomannan, also called, I wonder if they have it here. Sometimes it's called, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, PHGG. So both of these interventions were pretty much the same intervention, where they took the kids with autism spectrum disorders and they supplemented them with fiber, either GOS or galactomannan, and they followed them for 8 weeks or so. And what they found was exactly what I showed you on that previous cartoon. You use the prebiotic now, not a probiotic intervention. You're using a prebiotic fiber. It changes the microbiome because it's the food for particular bacteria. Now you're growing different bacteria. Now they're producing different metabolites. That's changing the integrity of the gut barrier, so less leaky gut. It changes the metabolites that are in the systemic circulation and across the whole axis signaling system, and it's changing the signals that get up to the brain, and as a result in a change in behavior. So better social connections, more eye contact, less acting out, fewer gastrointestinal problems, right? Fewer, bloating and constipation and stomach aches and things like that. Less acting out and irritability. And so, you look at that and you go, how in the world could something as simplistic as a fiber intervention, a fiber supplement, lead to changes in behavior in these in these autistic kids doesn't make any sense, except for it makes total sense when you understand that whole cascade of the biochemical dominoes effect across the gut-brain axis from the microbiome all the way up to the neurons in the brain. So that brings us to the last part of the presentation, which is what the heck do we do? How do we take all that understanding and apply it to our clients? Well, it comes down to functional nutrition, which is what we do. One of the places to intervene first, in my opinion, is to solve the fiber deficiency that everybody has. And it's not just about getting more fiber. That's a great place to start. But what you don't want your clients doing is, just thinking they can mix up a scoop of Metamucil every day, and solves their problem, right? That's a fine approach to increase that kind of fiber. But what we want is a diversity of fiber to grow a diversity of bacteria, to generate a diversity of signaling molecules, so that we're resilient in the stressful world that we have. So hardly anybody, except maybe the experts that are watching this masterclass, are getting enough fiber. But there's always room for more. I talk about fiber all the time. It's one of the soapboxes that I get up. I'm gonna skip over this just for time, but if you're gonna add more fiber and you're gonna try to get somebody from taking 10 grams of fiber a day up to 50 grams of fiber a day or 100 grams of fiber a day, go slow. Serving at a time, serving at a time, serving at a time, so you don't get gastrointestinal problems. We have the choice every single time we eat to choose: are we going to have more fiber? Or are we going to have more emulsifiers? Are we going to have more fiber and phytonutrients? Are we going to have more fast food hamburgers, right? The standard American diet, I don't think I need to tell this audience, is called SAD for a reason. It can lead us to have more mental wellness problems because we're eating so many processed foods. I could do a whole hour seminar on this. And I'm not so much the kind of person that says there are good foods and bad foods. I just want people to eat fewer processed foods and more whole foods based on statistics like this. This comes from the USDA. This is showing us what people are eating in general. And this is old data. This 63% number for processed foods is more like 75% now. And so what I want people to do is take that yellow and squish it. I want you to eat not 75% of your calories coming from processed foods. I want you to eat less of that. It's probably not going to be zero, but if we can make it not 75%, we can make it 35% or 25%. That means that we're using something else to displace that processed food. And I don't particularly care if that's coming from unprocessed or minimally processed animal foods or minimally processed plant foods. You'll see where I sort of land based on the research in just a slide or two. But if people would eat more whole plants or whole unprocessed meats, that would shrink that processed part, and that would take us in the right direction. Because think again, what we're trying to do is change the signals that are going across the gut-brain axis. We can choose bad foods. More cupcakes is going to lead to a change in the microbiome, an adverse change. That's going to lead to a change in your mucus lining, on your protecting your gut lining. It's going to result in more leaky gut. It's going to result in more inflammatory signaling and more immune system activation. And eventually, up here, it leads to neuroinflammation and neurodegeneration at the level of the brain. Or we can eat less cupcakes and more beans and more whole grains and more fermented foods and etc. And we can change the microbiome in a positive direction, increase the mucus lining, strengthen the barrier function, have anti-inflammatory cytokines and a primed immune system instead of an agitated immune system, leads to neurogenesis and neuroprotection. So your brain is getting stronger based on the foods that you're feeding because of the signaling across your gut-brain axis. So this is one of my favorite slides. If you're interested in having this slide set, you can go to any of the websites I shared before, doctalbot.com or threewaveswellness.com, and you can download this slide set and you can have it to explain to your clients what's going on when they choose a particular food. I'll just come back to this. It is a multifactorial systems approach that we really need to do. Um, it's all these things that I've talked about: neurotransmitters, hormones and peptides, inflammatory markers, endocannabinoids, immune system, nervous system, circulatory system, gut lining, microbiota, and even now we're starting to understand that the microbiome bacteria talk to your microbiome inside your cells. So I'm sorry, your mitochondria inside your cells. The mitochondria is not just like an energy producer anymore. It's another communication network that goes across the whole body. So we're just about to wrap up. So here's where I land on the like general recommendation I'll make to people. And it really comes down to eat more plants, right? It's the old Michael Pollan thing. If you're eating more plants and you're eating more herbs and spices, you're getting the fuel to grow and stimulate the production in your microbiome of the right kinds of signaling molecules. So here's my mental wellness food pyramid. This is what I advocate in the mental fitness book. You can see where all the other ones fail, where all the other ones fall. Whole grains are a little bit less. Beans and legumes are here. Proteins and dairy are here. Healthy fats, red meat is way up at the top. The only thing that's really being like, I guess, restricted are, processed baked goods, sugars, things like that. It's on a base of movement and social connection and sleep and mindfulness and nature exposure. Here's what it would look like on a plate. Half your plate is fruits and vegetables. And this is based on the data around Mediterranean style diet and inflammatory style diet and Scandinavian style diet and blue zone style diet. I sort of smushed all that together and said, on average, what are the diets that are most associated with positive mental wellness outcomes? We sometimes will recommend the 30 plant challenge to our clients, get sort of a fun way for them to go out there and get more diversity in their diet. So trying to get them to eat 30 different kinds of plants over a 7-day period. And that can be vegetables and fruits and seeds and nuts, but also spices. And this makes it fun for people. And we have people on Facebook sharing recipes and showing pictures of their meals and things like that, because we've got the choice. I said this already. We have the ability to choose how we feel meal by meal by meal. Are we going to choose standard American diet and feel crummy? Or are we going to choose like a more prudent diet? Whether you label it Mediterranean or you label it mental wellness diet, or you just have the parameters of, eating more of these foods and less of these foods, you're going to get the same outcome. So prudent diet versus Western diet, the result of what you eat is going to be a change in signaling across that gut-brain axis, and ultimately a change in how you feel. So a couple more books that I'm going to recommend to wrap things up. So I recommend the Psychobiotic Revolution, and I recommended Emran Meyer's Gut-Brain Axis book. I will also recommend these, which are very diet-oriented, very food-oriented. Brain Changer by Felice Jacka. This is very much around the Mediterranean diet and the anti-inflammatory diet. This one, Your Brain on Food, is sort of like unpacking the food-mood connection. And one of the reasons I like it is because Uma is she's also a trained chef. And so there's a lot of really good recipes in there to give you ideas of like how to prepare these foods if you're not familiar with some of them. So here's my cheat sheet on what we recommend for people to, how do you feed the system the right way? So some of them are nutritional things, like dietary things that we're feeding. Eat fewer processed foods, eat more of the F's, eat more fiber, eat more fermented foods, eat more flavonoids, do the 30 plant challenge. At the bottom here are things that we're eating in terms of supplements: strain-specific probiotics, structure-specific prebiotics, meaning getting different types of fibers that feed different types of bacteria, targeted postbiotic signaling. This could be amino acids like theanine. This could be pasteurized probiotic strains like Akkermansia that will have signaling qualities like GLP-1. Research-backed phytonutrients like Rafuma for depression, or what would be another good one? Ashwagandha, or pomegranate extract for mental focus, or pine bark extract for mental clarity. So there's a lot of choices, but we also have to think about what we're feeding our bodies in terms of physical activity, in terms of sleep quality, in terms of breathing and stress management, in terms of social connections. Those are all really, really important as well. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope this was beneficial for you to understand and unpack a little bit this idea of the fact that the gut, as a second brain, in large part determines what happens here in our head, our first brain. And by understanding the microbiome and the gut brain axis and the body brain biome connection at a deeper level, it can enable us to have more tools to bring to bear on the objective of helping our clients improve their overall mental well-being. Okay. So visit me at my website, doctalbot.com and threewaveswellness.com. And I hope that we can stay connected. Okay. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.